So, how do we start this off?
Well, you're the big kahuna on this one, so you
right.
can announce it and introduce what we're talking about.
All right. Hello, Internet, and welcome to another scintillating episode of Never Stay Dead. I'm your co-host, Matt, along with my other co-host,
Damian, who's wondering what the word scintillating means.
I read it in a book somewhere.
Oh, okay. It's not one you've coined all by yourself.
I could do a Stanleyism. That's fine. We are here today to talk about Batman White Knight, the Sean Murphy Batman special that ran recently and retroactively became part of the DC Black Label, despite a lack of appearance of a certain
appendage
Bat member.
There was talk at one point, Sean Murphy wanting to do. There's a one-page kind of naked in bed scene, and they carefully positioned word bubbles over crucial body parts, and I think he was saying, "Oh, someday there'll be an adult version of this where all of that will be uncovered." But I wonder now if that's going to happen.
So I just read this trade recently because I've been hearing things, and I'm a fairly big fan of Sean Murphy's work, and I just had to check it out, and we were looking for something to talk about, and it turned out Damian had read this recently and refreshed himself, if my memory's right.
Yeah, I read it as it came out monthly. I'm not sure when it ended, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. So it was a little the details were fuzzy in my brain, so I reread it entirely on Hoopla, even though I own physical copies tucked away in a box somewhere. And I was before this book came out, I'm a huge fan of Sean Murphy when he's writing and drawing because of his, what is now a trade, Punk Rock Jesus, which I thought was very above average writing, and of course awesome art by Sean Murphy. I consider Sean Murphy one of the very best artists at least for this kind of comic. There's even kind of shades of he's a bit of a Will Eisner-ish author or artist in my mind.
Huh.
Especially
I get more Frank Miller.
Well, sure, but Frank Miller comes from that too. But he's much more detailed than Frank Miller. And I think he's much more a master of interesting perspectives and lighting than Frank Miller, i.e. more like Will Eisner to me. But I definitely see the Frank Miller comparisons.
Huh. Yeah, I can
and
see.
You can't forget Frank Miller is hugely influenced by Will Eisner. They did a whole book together.
Which book was that?
Well, it's a whole book of them having a conversation.
Oh, that kind of book. Okay, I thought you meant a work.
Yeah, no, I don't think they ever worked together because Eisner, excuse me, to my knowledge, he never kind of teamed up with people except for kind of assistants who did the backgrounds or tightened the pencils for him or something.
Right.
But that's getting us off track.
Well, that's what we do.
That's how much I like Sean Murphy's art that I compare it to Will Eisner. For me, that's very high praise.
I feel like if you're going to compare anyone to Will Eisner in the comic game, that has to be high praise. I mean, it's Will Eisner. They named the Eisners after him, right? Like, there's very few artists as well regarded as he.
Right. And if you look at, like, right now I'm looking at the front piece of the book. I assume it's the same in your physical copy as in my digital copy. No, the front piece where it gives the credits.
Okay.
It's a picture of the Joker or someone like the Joker
in his cell?
sitting on a
Okay, yes.
And that's just such a beautiful black and white illustration. And that's kind of what I think of when I think of Will Eisner, is pictures like that.
Well,
and it just shows how detailed he can get.
Well, and so for those on audio who can't see this, it is Joker in his cell surrounded by Batman memorabilia.
Right, and things posted to the wall, articles.
Right. And most notably, right above him is there's this poster that's this image of Batman drawing up his cape that was the definitive image, I believe, of Batman the Animated Series from the 90s.
Yes, it was. It was indeed. And so it's both a very detailed picture and very, I think what you call expressionistic, like expressionistic art or expressionistic cinema. You know, a lot of the shadows are almost more important than the figures in a way.
Okay.
And the play of light and shadow is very extreme.
Right, which for this book, framing Joker or
right.
How'd you say his last name?
Napier, I think.
Napier.
Jack Napier, which was the name they gave the character who became the Joker in the first Tim Burton Batman movie, I believe. I think that's where the name Jack Napier comes from.
That sounds right, yeah.
So, shall I give one of my little précis, very rapid description and spoiler of this comic?
Oh, sure, go for it. I was going to try.
And then, no, then you go ahead and try. You're the head honcho of this one. This one was picked by Matt, so he runs the show here.
Oh, okay, yes. So this is a book where Joker is the White Knight in contrast to Batman being the Dark Knight. What it is that Joker is being the Joker in this it's effectively an Elseworlds tale, meaning not strict continuity.
Right.
I think that's
it would
important.
be nice if it were labeled Elseworlds. That would have really helped.
Well, Black Labels, the new Elseworlds, I guess. And
right, that's a good point. Now that it is labeled Black, it wasn't when I read it.
Right. So the Joker is fed some pills rather forcibly by Batman, which becomes a sticking point for a while. But these are meds that allow him to be sane. They allow him to be Jack Napier and not the Joker. But the Joker is labeled as a persona in his mind trying to regain control, essentially, throughout the book. And so this plays with the sanity bit. It's very similar to a J.M. DeMatteis arc called Going Sane that was done a while ago. But there's a lot more piled on to the premise that goes throughout the book for when things slide back to the status quo, inevitably.
Right. Well, I had written down that it takes place in kind of 4 acts.
Okay.
One where Batman is out of control, beats up Joker and gives him the pills, shoves these pills down his throat. And then the next act is where the Joker becomes sane, both sane and a super genius who wants to fix Gotham. And he begins his sort of kind of political and public relations effort to save Gotham from Batman and the Joker, basically. And then in my view, then the next act, he gets enough power that he can cause Batman to be arrested and placed in Arkham, and starts up a new police unit that is basically everyone has Batmobiles and all the Bat gear, and so the police have taken over Batman's role with the help of Nightwing and Batgirl. And then in the final act, they have to bring Batman back out of Arkham to help defeat the new Neo Joker, who is freezing the city with a freeze ray, and the Joker the Joker / Jack Napier kind of has to make a sacrifice to help save the city,
but not really.
Not as big of a sacrifice as it seemed at first. It's almost like Murphy wanted to give the Joker more of a happy ending, or Jack Napier more of a happy ending.
Yeah, the way that plays out in the end is a bit muddled, and I think actually kind of kills what's supposed to be a interesting take at the end of the book here, but we can get there.
Yeah, I'd agree with that assessment.
So there's a lot of things going on in this book.
There's a lot going on in it.
So there's the story, which in and of itself has a lot. There's the fact that this is a very kind of fan fiction-y play on, like I said, that old story Going Sane. Would I say
Which I have not read. Well, how does Going Sane play out?
It's smaller in scale because of what most comics have to be. And that's what I mean by this being fan fiction-y, I guess, also. So Going Sane is dealing with if the Joker was balanced and became sane, and it's more like he just becomes a Gothamite and has to deal with modernity and that kind of cracks.
But he doesn't take down Batman through more sane means, which is kind of what Jack Napier does.
Right, and eventually there's some Joker Batman play when he's not fully the Joker, but this drags in the entire Bat cast. So Poison Ivy has a bit, the Mad Hatter has a bit, like you said, the Freeze Ray, Mr. Freeze.
Right, Mr. Freeze has a pretty big bit.
Yeah.
There's 2 Harley Quinns, which actually I think is one of the strokes of genius of this book.
Yeah, that's something to really dig into, because that's loaded. But
the basic history of Batman's a bit changed, I think. If I understood correctly, which I missed on my first read, Jason Todd was the first Robin and Dick Grayson was the second.
Yes, and they do that so that they can take the Jason dying to inform the then Robin to become Nightwing, to have a more divisive split and more of a reason to be upset with him. Right. To kind of let Nightwing be the middle child, if you will.
Right.
In a way.
Which makes Dick Grayson a completely different character than we're used to. He's not the cheerful person at all. He's the bitter, angry at his father, can't forgive his father kind of person. His father being Bruce Wayne. It's
like they should have let Dick die and then just made Jason become Nightwing later. I feel like that might have been a little more of a play to make this book stand out and fit better.
Either way, though, it kind of just reads as not a very important thing, but just something that Sean Murphy had always wanted to do. Kind of going back to your calling this being like fan fiction. It's like, well, in my headcanon of Batman, Jason Todd came first, so I'm just going to do that.
Right, which I don't mind. It's just that the way that Dick is written, it's Jason. So I don't know. It's just a little odd. And so
it is odd. Yeah. I guess he wanted to leave it that Jason Todd is the one who seemingly is killed by the Joker.
Yeah. And I mean, okay, so that's how this book is playing it. Fine. And then Batgirl feels split between the two.
Right.
Which I think is one of the weaker aspects.
And Batgirl works much closer with Batman than I think she normally does in the normal mythos.
Right. She's basically the Robin as of the point where this book starts.
Right. And if she is I think she is, I don't know if she's acknowledged as Commissioner Gordon's daughter, but I assume she still is.
Yeah, I don't know if that was supposed to be a secret or not, which made a couple points odd because her and Nightwing become part of this task force that Jack Napier sets up afterwards. Maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves here.
It's okay. There's so much here. I think we're just going to have to jump around to things that pop into our head.
Right. So if you want the plot synopsis, I mean, you kind of just have to read this book, and we're just going to try to talk about it because trying to plot
let's
summarize
just talk
this
about
thing.
Aspects of it. We could talk about the general complexity. Did you think that worked?
Which just overall there being...
The overall complexity of this 8-issue series.
How do I say this? I'm not against the fact that it was so complex. I mind the level of complexity because by the end it's clear that it wasn't fully thought out and it wasn't all building to something. Or considered fully. Right.
It seemed more fully considered on my second read. On my first read, it seemed oddly both complex and repetitive.
Okay.
And so looking at it on a second read, I'd say there was more good stuff here than I realized, but maybe he needed an editor to sit down and work through the story and the beats of the story better. Despite its complexity, it felt too long. And I know it was originally, I think, a 6-issue series, and it was so popular in the first few issues that they gave Murphy permission to expand it to 8 issues, if I'm remembering correctly.
That sounds right.
So, and I can see why he wanted more space, because he has a lot of different, say, character arcs going on. Mm-hmm. He has a character arc for 2 different Harleys, not to mention the Joker and Batman and Batgirl and even Mr. Freeze. I always forget his name. Dr. Freeze, Mr. Freeze, Captain Cold.
Captain Cold's the other guy.
It's not Dr. Freeze, is it? Even though he is probably a PhD.
No, there is a Dr. Cold or something between Marvel and DC, I know. But it's Mr. Freeze. Even though he's legit a doctor. More so than a lot of other comic characters.
A lot of people call Doctor. Yeah. And I suppose Jim Gordon is kind of going through a character arc. And
he gets dropped, I feel.
Even smaller character arcs are like Bullock, I always forget his name.
Bullock.
Bullock's going through a bit of a change, along with the character Duke, whose last name I forget, who is just a teenager in the normal Batman stuff, another Robin-like character, but here is a lone vigilante in the African American neighborhood, who used to be was a veteran and then became a cop and then quit being a cop because of the corruption. So he has no connection with the character Duke in other comics, as far as I can tell, except, he's African American, which is
Yeah, and so that's where I have to bring in one of the other elements that makes this book more complicated to read. And I feel like I just have to address this head on. Yes. Sean Murphy, in a way, was claimed by Comicsgate as one of their creators.
Yes, and I don't know if he ever answered that.
He purposely never said no, but never said yes. He took the most business appropriate path, if you will, and which is what Comicsgate is all about. So,
but the politics here are not clear.
Well,
I don't think. But he uses a lot of catchphrases like gatekeepers, snowflakes,
SJWs.
He uses the word SJ, social justice warriors. In the end, that part doesn't play out, I don't think. I felt like he thought about going somewhere with that and then let it drop. Maybe.
Well, it's interesting because ultimately, at the end of the day, how Sean Murphy feels about Comicsgate is something I don't know. I don't think there's ever an official public statement, and I'm not going to necessarily try to label or put him one way there, but he never said no. And a lot of what I can say for sure is a lot of people who label themselves as part of Comicsgate were drawn and enjoyed this book at first.
And then I didn't hear them talk about it later on.
By the time it ended and the trade came out, they stopped talking about it.
Right. Well, amongst other things, this book takes more head-on than any other Batman book, although it's obviously there in tons of Batman, that Batman enjoys brutalizing people, and despite the fact that he doesn't use a gun, he is a pretty vicious kind of vigilante. It became at the very last page, to really spoil things, the very last page, he says to Jim Gordon, "I enjoy hurting criminals, Jim." Mm-hmm. So it's more explicit as Batman being a law and order, a quote, law and order type of person who's out of control, which is not a comfortable. It tends to lean into the more conservative side of things, and if you portray Batman poorly because of that, you're sort of perhaps talking about police brutality and other things that are more espoused by liberals normally, I suppose. Am I getting off track here? Or
No, I think that tracks. And what's interesting, too, is throughout this book, much like The Dark Knight Returns, there are a couple newscasters that we get very Twitter-esque debate from. That's where the term social justice warrior was used.
Right.
And you have...
And one represents the liberal and one represents the conservative, too. A man and a woman.
Right. And how that plays out and who blames who and who points the fingers about what about the Joker is interesting at first because it breaks down oddly like you'd expect if you assume that Batman is an established quantity in Gotham.
Right.
But what's interesting is by the end, both of them are so kind of conflicted and muddled about it because Jack Napier did some good things the wrong way, ultimately was worse about it than what they were blaming Batman for, got some things done, and then ended up being the Joker at the end of the day, and they just had to throw him in a cell. It was ultimately all kind of futile.
Right. And, that was, to me, at the heart of this, the flaw, the biggest flaw at the heart of this, it's still, this is a fascinating graphic novel, and I actually liked it a lot better on the second read. But to me, the flaw at the heart is, does the author believe that Jack Napier was basically good? Or was he basically bad, but just behaving badly in a different way than the Joker by more subtle, more somewhat political manipulations of things? Or was he, through some of his bad behavior, just like Batman, the ends justify the means, did he really create something good?
Well,
and I feel like the author vacillated on that, couldn't make up his mind.
Well, because I feel like ultimately the theme that we're going for here in all kinds of aspects is abuse and how it's cyclical.
Right.
So whether or not Jack Napier was good or not, I don't know if it matters, because if you view it a certain way, Jack isn't born until he comes out of the result of Batman brutalizing the Joker with pills, trying to do the right thing completely the wrong way.
But Jack is supposed to be the good person that was hidden inside the Joker.
Right. But he's also ultimately manipulated and controlled by his girlfriend, the quote-unquote real Harley Quinn.
Right. Harleen Quinzel, the actual psychiatrist, as opposed to a bank teller who later becomes Harley Quinn.
Because the original Harley left when Joker was too abusive, and then this other one stepped in and the Joker didn't even notice, which
that's great, actually. I thought that was a great touch of what the Joker is like.
Right. But also then she manipulated situations to bring out this Jack the way she wanted to, making her the controlling, conniving one of the relationship. But it was for good reasons. And so is that wrong or right?
And Batman acknowledges her having good reasons at the end. But really, did her scheme actually cause... her scheme involved taking away the willpower of a whole bunch of criminals.
Right. And manipulating Batman.
And manipulating things so that Harleen Quinzel, Harley Quinn became Neo Joker and nearly destroyed a large portion of Gotham.
And what's interesting, too, is the two Harleys is commentary on some level. I am navel-gazing or armchair psychology here, but those two Harleys, I believe a part of that is Sean Murphy's talk about Harley Quinn and how she's supposed to be versus the Harley Quinn we have now.
Well, it fit perfectly. There was a Harley Quinn that was based on the TV show, the animated Batman the Animated TV show,
right?
Which we mentioned is visually referenced right at the beginning in the front piece. And and then this new, oddly sexy, punk, pornographic-looking one.
Right.
So it does seem like there are two Harleys. So that just seemed a perfect kind of thing. And that there were two different approaches to the Joker. One with the fantasy that you could improve him in. One that just loved the S&M of it all.
Yeah. which...
But I still think that I feel that Sean Murphy, that it did matter because he made it seem like it mattered whether Jack Napier was actually a good person or a bad person. And even though the public was thinking he was a good person, we saw how he was manipulating things behind the scenes all along. It wasn't like a surprise to us later when it was revealed, us readers. But they still have this big scene where Harleen Quinzel points out to him that he hasn't been behaving well because he used supervillains and he had them attack downtown Gotham to achieve his ends. But then later she does say he was a good... You know what I'm saying? I just feel like that aspect of it.
Right, and that's what I mean by, like, it's so convoluted and all this. And when you get to the end, at the end act being Jack and Batman working together to bring down Neo Joker in association with most of the villains at that point.
It's like the end of a big buddy movie / James Bond movie with a giant scene of everyone fighting in a giant set piece. Wonderfully drawn and everything.
And then Jack supposedly sacrifices himself so that Harley can get away in this big car chase. Except he ultimately survives unscathed.
Right. With no particular explanation, but Batman just finds him floating underwater and rescues him.
And then, as part of this, he's sacrificing his sanity, his Jackness, to do the right thing for the city and everyone, ultimately.
Right.
But it doesn't matter because before that, they established he was going to have to give that up anyways because the pills weren't
the pills were
anymore.
working less and less.
I mean, I guess it fast-tracked it.
Yeah,
but...
so I think what we're looking at is just so many mixed messages thematically all over the place.
And that's
lots of great thematic ideas, but they mixed up this way. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
Oh, no, it's fine. I was just going to repeat, and that's what I mean by, by the end of this thing, it just feels like it was kind of wrapped up and not very tightly put together by the very end. So it really kind of undercuts what was a really strong build, and they just kind of had to pick one way to go with it, and I think it would have just been strong, but by kind of playing it both ways and trying to make something dramatic that already was undercut is what killed it. Whereas if they just played through the story, I think it would have been fine. And it's frustrating to read a story where you're like, I don't want to story doctor too much, but that feels like an oversight. That just feels sloppy.
In a weird way, both Batman and the Joker are forgiven at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But that part seems a little forced. I was pretty well convinced during the course of this story Batman was out of control and was behaving like a criminal. And he kind of admits it himself, but that's all right because now he admits it and he's going to let the world know he's Bruce Wayne. Which also, how would that really turn out? But anyway.
Well, and it would have been interesting to see that if ultimately by the Joker trying to do good, even if somewhat flawed, that's what destroys Batman by making people see how he's treating others and creating the situation to be worse. You know, something like that to even just tilt it a bit more.
Right.
And then, because this is... there's no continuity here. Batman doesn't have to exist by the end of this thing.
Right.
And if we walked away with the Batman persona no longer being viable by anyone who propped it up or set it up, and then Bruce Wayne's still alive, I think it could have been a very interesting meditation on the whole idea of vigilantism and all that. I think it could have had a lot more weight. And instead we just kind of get this sing-song ending, like you were pointing out.
And if it did that, it would be more of a kind of realistic look at trying to do good and getting power and things like that, where, you know, in the arc of many what's the word? Not tyrant, but many of a powerful ruler, at first they do a lot of good, but if they stay in power too long, things get corrupted.
Mm-hmm.
And the best choice is to step down after a certain point. I don't know. There's so many interesting things here, though. I still feel like it's really worth reading. And the art doesn't hurt. And the beautiful, beautiful coloring by Matt Hollingsworth also.
Yeah, and I want to point out...
It's just feeling it could have been so much better, because of all the good stuff in it, in a way.
Right. For a book to kind of have the failings this book has, it has to be so much more ambitious and push so much harder than what we're getting in our general monthlies. You can't get something this daring with the idea of Batman with the current, not with just the current, but I mean with your average Batman run, because there's some just rules that they can't break by the nature of being serialized storytelling, and there has to be a Batman next month. And even when they kill Batman, it doesn't read the same way as some of the stuff that they're doing. If some of the tricks that were pulled in this White Knight were pulled in a general Batman run, it wouldn't have the same weight, or they couldn't write it the same way, because it's going to come around.
Yeah, whereas within the confines of a, quote, Elseworld story or Black Label story, it can have an ending that... And you're right, it should have ended with Batman just stopping being Batman. It went halfway to that.
Right.
Another kind of on the positive thing that I really noticed on the second reading is how just about every character has two faces, in the sense of very obvious with Jack Napier and the Joker, but really Batman has two faces too. This out of control, hyper-focused crime fighter who doesn't listen to anybody, and then this kind of sentimental person who's, Alfred is his father figure, and he has these children figures and stuff. Maybe not intentionally, but it did feel like there was an evil Batman in here and a good Batman in here. And the same even for Bullock and for Harleen Quinn. Both Harleen Quinzel's had two faces, and even the Mr. Freeze seems, is he a villain and a Nazi, or is he just a good guy who cares about health and taking care of people?
Oh, well, and that was something we haven't talked about. In this book, they make Mr. Freeze of Nazi heritage.
So he's the son of a Nazi war criminal who was brought over to the U.S. for his scientific knowledge in making freeze weapons. So he himself is only the son of a Nazi criminal. And Thomas Wayne aided and abetted in bringing Nazi criminal scientists over to the U.S., apparently. Although later it's kind of revealed that, at least in the case of Mr. Freeze's father, his intention was its help in health issues, not in creating weapons, even though creating weapons was the ultimate result.
Yeah, that feels like that was
just a lot of extra stuff thrown in for no particular reason, except
that's a lot of the complication sort of thing that's thrown in, and nothing much is, because that's a whole arc right there.
Right. The Nazi heritage of the Waynes.
Right, and maybe saying okay, so this guy was a Nazi scientist, but he had this technology, and if we appropriate it, or however you want to go about saying that, we can ultimately do good and make something positive happen for it. But yeah, we do have to associate with this guy to get it done, but does that ultimately matter? And there's a lot to take in there. And that's something I find interesting about a lot of Sean Murphy's comics, between Punk Rock Jesus or Tokyo Ghost, is he tackles some heavy stuff and plays with the ideas in interesting ways, and doesn't always have a definitive answer, but sometimes he does. And he's willing to do these things that, whatever comic you're reading, whatever problems they might have, they're so much more vibrant, and they make you think about things in the real world in a way that I just don't get from most of the other comics, which is a big reason why I'm such a fan of his work. Despite the fact that I find some of his noted political leanings kind of questionable sometimes, I know at least he's
we don't really know his political leanings. We only know that Comicsgate thinks he's a manly man.
Well, if you do follow Sean Murphy, some things come here or there.
Well, I do know, in Punk Rock Jesus, When I read it, I was not sure if he comes down on the side of God exists or God doesn't exist. But then I read a bio or maybe an interview where he said, no, this was he's an atheist and he wrote Punk Rock Jesus with the point of view of an atheist. But I was not sure about that. It seemed to leave questions open in Punk Rock Jesus.
Well, whether or not he believes in God, but I feel like Tokyo Jesus.
And judging from this comic, it's not sure where he lands on, being tough on crime and all of that kind of. That's one small slice of what some conservatives believe, but that Batman kind of represents that slice of conservatism to me, anyway.
Well, I what I think is definitive here is he's not for vigilantism at the end of the day. That's the bigger thing within a Batman comic, especially. And I think there's some play there, like how tough do you need to be on crime, what's right, and if you push people too far, are you not creating the problem? That's a big part of this, but there's also the need for law enforcement and being there, which is a real world balance take that you have to consider. But to say this one thing that we're on about is definitively wrong, there's definitely some hard lines in here, but it's so jumbled in with the rest of the situations and issues that relate to it that it makes for a rich tapestry, which I think is what we're saying. There's definitely the failings in this book, but even the failings are so interesting to consider. It's not just villain of the week.
If you are a conservative comic book creator and you're dealing with something where you can express some of those ideas, like possibly this Batman, you're in an awkward position right now, because if the anti-SJW people take you to their bosom, then you're in a no-win situation, because they also they're not just a political group. They like to slam people personally and make the people that they perceive as being liberals in the comic book world feel attacked. So you're not just saying you're conservative, you're saying you are attacking your fellow co-workers if you side with them. But if you don't side with them, then people will say you're one of the liberals, and which might also be uncomfortable if you're a conservative. So I can see why he never quite, wanted to step out on that issue either way. I don't know what the right way to go for a conservative person who doesn't want to be seen as attacking his coworkers responds to all this kind of stuff.
Right, and I'd be fascinated to hear him talk about it a bit more, but most of the reason I brought it up is because there's no way I could read this comic without thinking about that whole debate, because it seems...
because he threw the words right in the comic.
Right, it's part of the comic in some ways. And so understanding that debate and how it relates to comics in particular, and with something like Batman, that...
And how he would have written this if he wrote it in a vacuum without the internet responding issue by issue would be interesting to know too.
Or even if it was just, 3 years ago.
Because originally it was supposed to be 6 issues, then it was 8 issues. So that means it couldn't have all been completed before it started getting published. And again, maybe like a lot of people, he has a mixture of conservative and other middle of the road kind of beliefs or whatever.
Right.
But anyway, I think ultimately, to me, he needed an editor to kind of go over all the story beats with him and iron things out better, and maybe talk about which elements to just drop so that it wasn't quite such a rich stew of random things, such as, dude, we really need the whole thing about his father possibly having Nazi connections, which turned out not to be so bad in the end. Another thing that jumped out at me in a big way was, I really liked this idea, but the numbers seemed crazy. There's a fund that repairs Gotham from all the damage done by Batman fighting criminals that spends $3 billion a year. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of great the way he used it, as originally Jack Napier used it as something showing corruption, with that the taxpayers' money was being used to prop up Batman. But then at the end, it's revealed that it's all Bruce Wayne's money.
Right.
But that Bruce Wayne can afford to just throw away $3 billion a year.
Well,
I think even Bill Gates would hesitate to spend $3 billion a year, but maybe Bill Gates could afford it, but almost no one else.
right. Yeah, that's
It was an extreme figure.
No, and at that point, I'm like, what does Wayne Industries actually do?
Right. There's a lot of billionaires now, but if they spent $3 billion a year, most of them would soon not be billionaires, maybe within 1 year.
Right, exactly. So
it is kind of clever, like some of the things, but he didn't follow them up further, but nice little throwaway things like how these savvy business real estate kind of people were buying up real estate where Batman caused devastation, and then would wait for the public, the Batman repair fund to come in and repair things, and then their values would go up.
Mm-hmm. It was an interesting play on this idea and like how things would affect through, and clearly, and like I said, fan comic, but fan comic in the best way. Like there's all these cute little nods to Batman lore throughout, and clearly this play, like if you assigned any real world logic to these kinds of events happening, and if they're happening regularly, how people would take advantage or react or work through that is fascinating.
This is not a comic for someone who is not fairly well steeped in Batman.
Yeah. Yes. Though,
you know, I would not, even though it's, got lots of great stuff, I wouldn't recommend it to, someone who just occasionally wants to read a superhero graphic novel.
I agree with that. But I would throw it in with a lot of the other stuff, like The Last Laugh or Batman Returns or Year One or any of that stuff. Year Two.
Really? No, I feel like Year One is a great starting place for a Batman neophyte.
It's Year One. I mean,
yes.
I certainly have people read Year One before this, but I'd put this before Hush,
I'm not sure. I think Hush would be easier. I mean, it's not as complex, but I think it would be easier for a new reader.
Yeah, probably.
To me, this is very much, aimed towards fans.
Gotcha.
I mean, probably if you just had watched a lot of Batman the Animated Series or something like that, that might be fine too.
All right. Well, did you have anything else you wanted to tack on for White Knight?
I guess just the way I loved the art. Every few pages, he would just do this amazingly detailed scene in often someone's office or something like that was very captivating. And I like at the same time that when needed, he just does things very sketchily. So he really controls the pace and the mood of the story, not only by, how many words are in the balloon or how many panels on the page, but actually the way he draws it. Things speed up or slow down depending on kind of the weight of the lines and the amount of detail in a given panel. And I thought that was just really brilliant. And I think even though I wish this was better, I think he's a great writer, and I hope he continues to write his own stories rather than have, he's done work with Scott Snyder and Mark Millar, and I think he's better than Scott Snyder.
Yeah.
And Mark Millar does a whole different thing, which is his own thing, which he does well. But I think that Murphy is such a good writer and can work so well with the art and the storytelling that I just hope he keeps pursuing this. And there was a rumor that he's going to do more in the White Knight universe, which may or may not be a good idea. But I guess it sold very well in the floppies anyway. We'll see how the trades do.
I think the trade's been selling pretty well. I've seen copies go here and there.
Oh, nice. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you, because I was surprised that you chose this, because you've kind of been repeating to me in the past year, well, I'm not really a Batman guy.
Yeah.
So I'm surprised you even decided to pick this one up. Was it because of Sean Murphy's art in the first place?
Yeah, it's Sean Murphy, and so we've had a bunch of friends, Joshua Hayes, DeCosta, whatnot, that are huge Batman fans.
Right.
And for a long time,
right.
I was reading...
Yeah, a lot of people.
A lot of Batman. And I just kind of like realized, like, I don't love all this. I get a lot more out of it talking with these people than sometimes reading it, because they're picking up on so much more than what I do. And so,
right, you don't have to like Batman to like superheroes or like comic books.
Right. And so, I don't know, I enjoy a good Batman comic here and there, and I'm still picking up Detective, but this is something I want to read because it was Sean Murphy, but also there's a good Batman mini. And I feel like Batman's the character that gets this more than any other character. Is there'll just be these offshoot mini-series that people do, and they're amazing.
Right. Batman is a source of kind of endless, seems to absorb the sort of retelling of the basic Gotham story in endless variations, and it works when it's done in a short form really well.
Right. And I really enjoy that. Like, I enjoy the Matt Wagner Batman stuff, or the Tim Sale and... help me out here. Tim Sale and
Jeff Loeb.
And Jeff Loeb Batman stuff. Like, that stuff I adore. But the month-to-month, maybe not as much. But I mean, when you have those works, it's not that it's Batman. It's that those comics stand head and shoulders above so many others, and they happen to be Batman to me.
So people are often sort of put on a Batman mini to do a little star turn, in a sense.
Yeah.
There's a non-Batman Batman story that I was really enjoying by Kurt Busiek with another really good artist whose name I now can't.
In Astro City, or?
No. It was they did it in like 60-page issues on perfect bound, or maybe they were 48-page issues, and it was called like Creature of the Night.
Okay.
And it was someone whose like name was Wayne Bruce or something like that, and his life parallels Batman that he read about in the comic book. So Batman's just a comic book character, but the spirit of his twin who died in the womb is following him around and takes on a bat-like creature and fulfills the guy's fantasies of fighting crime. But he starts to realize the creature will do anything to make things turn, so innocent people get framed by him and stuff to make things fit his own fantasies. And it was 3 of these mini graphic novels. And I thought it was done, but now I saw that they've got a 4th one coming out, so the story's not quite done yet. But that just pops into mind. It's a very similar artist to Sean Murphy, and it's not complete, I guess, yet.
Yeah. I guess a question for you off the top of the mind is, can you think of any runs like that aren't Batman? Because I feel like Batman gets the lion's share of that sort of thing.
Right. I'm trying to think of...
I mean, All-Star Superman, I guess, but...
Yeah, I mean, Superman gets a little bit of that. I think they've tried that with Wonder Woman here and there. Currently, there's Wonder Woman Earth 1. Yeah,
which has 2 entries.
That crazy title that confuses everybody, because Earth 1 is not the main Earth. And there's been 2 volumes of it by Grant Morrison. I haven't read the 2nd volume yet. It was not, in my mind, very successful in the first volume.
I'd agree with that.
And there was a mini called Legend of Wonder Woman, which was really good for younger readers. I read it with my daughter. That was pretty awesome.
I think there's a good Jill Thompson trade that's a little set apart as well.
Of Wonder Woman?
Yeah. True Amazon or something?
I think I got that out of the library and ended up not loving it.
Okay.
I like Jill Thompson's art, but I don't know if I like her writing that much.
Okay.
Well, how about over at Marvel? Wolverine has gotten a lot of minis over the years.
I mean, there's the famous 4-issue Wolverine mini, Frank Miller.
The Claremont Miller
Yeah,
that.
And then the Weapon X. So yeah, there's that. I guess you have Tim Sale and Jeff Loeb doing their run. Daredevil Yellow, Hulk Gray, Spider-Man Blue,
right.
Captain America Red, White, and Blue, was it?
Yeah, I think you're right. Or was it Captain America White?
Or maybe it was.
Which was kind of odd. Yeah, it's hard to think of anyone else besides Batman who really has this long track record. Going back, I think it all started with that Frank Miller Batman Returns or The Return of the Dark Knight, or whatever it was called. And then, they even established Legends of the Dark Knight as an ongoing series that always had short arcs that were just standalone stories by different sort of star creator pairings at the time.
Right. Yeah, no. And I mean, I love that aspect and that sort of thing, but I'd like to see it with other characters as well, because I feel like there's some archetypes to play with that would be more fun. And I guess DC's set itself up better for it with the whole idea of the Elseworlds and the multiverse. Whereas with Marvel, you had What If, and there were these very disposable single issues, and you very rarely get these takeaways of just letting the character stand as the icon and letting it play through.
Right. The Marvel characters don't yet, well, some of them could, but they don't seem to, for the most part, be these iconic, static kind of ideas. They're always growing and changing, which can be good and can be bad depending on the situation. But it doesn't lend itself to these minis that, take an imaginary Spider-Man and give him a whole arc that pretty much removes him from any continuity, temporarily.
And I think you could have a lot of fun playing with, like, the Spider-Man villains and kind of this kind of a light or whatever.
Right.
Though they've certainly done Norman Osborn sane, and that didn't make for a lot of great comics, I don't think. But...
Well, to plug Untold Tales of Spider-Man, you guys were kind of watching the arc of Sandman through a series of episodes. You could almost imagine a standalone, 6-issue series just about Sandman or something.
After going through that, I think he's a character, like, as opposed to doing a Spider-Man one of these, I think doing a Sandman story and maybe going back and giving him an arc through the years and playing with that would create a really great comic, because he's a very bizarre character with a bizarre backlog that goes throughout Marvel history. I mean, he was as much a Thing villain as he was a Spider-Man villain. Then he was part of the Wild Pack. Then he's part of the Avengers. Like,
yeah,
all
and
over.
Yeah, he's all over. Yeah, so you could definitely tell some interesting stories. Maybe the villains at Marvel are more suited for that.
Ooh.
Obviously, they have done Doctor Doom stories, for periods of time.
Yeah.
You could pull that out more. Maybe it's just Marvel doesn't quite have the inclination to do these kinds of stories, that they see their characters as more part of the whole fabric and it's harder for them to separate them out and have them have a, one-shot kind of story. Not one shot in one issue, but that the story exists by itself.
A more true blue graphic novel.
Right. Although in the 80s, Marvel did a lot of graphic novels back when graphic novels were 60 pages or something.
Yeah, that's right.
They did a lot of, and I haven't read very many of them, but they did a lot of them then. They were trying to kind of have these standalone archetypal stories about, well, like the one we did once read for a group discussion. Was it your suggestion? But what is it? God
Loves Man Kills, yeah.
God Loves Man Kills. That's kind of a standalone outside of continuity that it later got brought into continuity, I suppose.
Right, and I mean, of those graphic novels, I think that's the most...
that was the most successful one, yeah.
Because that one has stood head and shoulders above the rest. I think there's another X-Men one. There's a few Spider-Man ones that I'm aware of, but they're not really, like, big Spider-Man stories in the grand scheme of things. There's some weird Avengers one where Venom was there, I think, and all that were just kind of weird, bigger comics that ultimately just would have been a few issues, I think, and just no B-plot.
At least twice, Stan Lee tried to do standalone graphic novels about the Silver Surfer that were disconnected from the Marvel Universe. One with Jack Kirby near the end of his return to Marvel, and it was not very good. And one with Mobius,
right,
which was a little better, but it just seemed kind of odd. Maybe it was to my eyes as a reader to just have the Silver Surfer and Galactus be the only superpowered characters in a story without any Marvel heroes there at all. But he definitely wanted the Mobius one. I can't remember the one he did with Jack Kirby so well, but he definitely wanted the Mobius one to be like a parable. Maybe it was even called a parable. Maybe it was called like Silver Surfer, a parable. And maybe that's going too non-specific. You still want kind of a specifics of a character arc, just have the character arc go where you can't normally go.
Yeah, I just think it's a strong idea, and I'd like to see a little more of it. I think part of it is just because after reading for years and years, I love the characters, but I could maybe deal with a little less of the rat race and maybe a little more
Right.
focus.
Yeah, as much as I enjoyed my reread of this, it actually made me feel like, phew, I need a rest from Gotham and Batman now. Like, that was a lot of Batman and Gotham in just 8 issues, and I'm about to start back up with Batman and Detective when Pete Tomasi comes on, I think next month.
Sounds
But I
right.
feel at the moment a bit bat exhausted.
Well, you just need to grab your Batarade and refuel.
Right. I have to rehydrate on batness. I just think, I mean, there are people we know like Joshua Hayes and Luke and many others who read every Bat book that comes out, and that's a lot of Bat, a lot of Gotham.
I mean, I read every Spider-Man book, and
Right, they're like you.
yeah.
Spider-Man.
Well, it's funny to me though, because
Now, have you gone through periods where you had to, pull away from the Spider? I thought a year or two ago you weren't reading so much.
yeah, more of my pull away from Spider-Man has been fan outrage more so than exhaustion. Once with right after Brand New Day, or One More Day. Sorry, I always mix up those titles because
And that was quite a while ago.
yeah, but I definitely pulled away and then came back about a year later. And then it turns out I missed a lot of great issues because immediately right after that, it's really good. And then right when Superior started, I was not having it, and I pulled away. And I actually still stand by that
Right.
because I enjoyed reading Superior when it was said and done, but in its day, I just wasn't. It wasn't for me, and it bugged me because I do love Spider-Man, and it's the one comic that I kind of just need every month to just be
Yes.
in there to kind of help things along for me. Like, I just love that book. And when it wasn't really Spider-Man for me, it
It was like a separate Spider-Man family comic rather than the central Spider-Man comic anymore.
right, and they're like the darker, whatever Spider-Man. I'm like, oh man, you mean like Venom or Scarlet Spider, which I'm also reading? Like, it just didn't register for me.
So at most times when you're reading Spider-Man, you are also reading Venom and Scarlet Spider and Peter Parker, and are you reading
Or
Spider-Gwen and
Yep.
what's the one that was in another universe where he stayed married to Mary Jane and had a baby? Are they
Renew
are they
Your
still doing
Vows.
that? Renew Your Vows. So you literally do get them all.
Yes.
So I am never that way. I think I've never managed to like stick with one character for a long period of time without taking breaks.
Yeah, and up until the podcast, I used to try to pick one or two Spider books to not get purely for financial and diversity reasons.
So
Also,
the podcast gives you an excuse to spend more money.
yeah, well, that and
It's research.
right now, I was hitting a point where I was like, I have to give up one of these. I'm very close to dropping Spider-Man Deadpool because it's terrible and has been for 3 years now, and I really should have dropped it.
And has Peter Parker ended? Peter Parker Spectacular?
Peter Parker Spectacular ends next issue, and then they're basically just replacing it with Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, which is going to be Tom Taylor. And
Will you get that?
Oh yeah, I'm definitely getting that. Tom Taylor and
Tom Taylor's
Spider-Man.
a good writer, but I just saw an image of it, and it definitely looked like the kids' Spider-Man or something.
I don't think it's going to be like
Is it
Spider-Man
Miles
Adventures.
Morales? Is it going to be Miles?
No, Miles Morales has a book starting up. I forget the creators' names who are going to be on that. I'm also pretty sure I can't pronounce them.
And do you always get the Miles Morales?
No, that's going to be new for me. I've never picked up Miles Morales' book before. I kind of avoided him for a long time. I never had anything against Miles Morales, but I dropped Ultimate Spider-Man, which I was getting in trades, and I stopped picking up the trades around the time that the Ultimate Universe rebooted. Because I stopped getting...
Right.
Because I was getting everything Ultimate in trades. And then once Ultimatum, I think that was the name of it, hit, it was bad. And I stopped reading the entire thing. And eventually I heard Spider-Man pick back up and Miles Morales was great. So I went back and read that retroactively, and now I've read every Miles Morales book in one form or another.
Okay.
But I
So
hadn't picked it up
you
concurrently.
Follow it,
In its moment. Yeah.
In its moment, yeah.
Or I lie. I haven't read every book with Miles Morales because I haven't read every Champions issue because I stopped following that one.
I have wondered, like, if every Superman-related comic were brilliant, whether would I want to get them all? Because I keep picking them all up and then dropping them all. I mean, constantly.
That's interesting. I definitely tried to
There's a part of me that wants Superman to just be something that I enjoy, but most of the time I don't.
That's how I am with Wonder Woman, and right now I'm thrilled with it, and I know you're not as such.
I'm on it, and my expectations were way too high because I had such a high opinion of the Ms. Marvel comics that I read, even though I didn't follow it. I thought they were excellent comics, and I read maybe the first 4 trades worth, I suppose, in single issues.
Right.
And then just stopped with the plan to read the rest someday. But I was always, ever since reading those, I was thinking, wow, I can't wait till G. Willow Wilson writes Wonder Woman. Possibly the best women superhero writer at the moment in comics.
Arguable, but she's...
Well, so it seemed to me.
No.
But then on Wonder Woman, it just seems like this is an okay Wonder Woman story. Ares looks kind of like Steve... Trevor, and I thought at first that was the twist, that Steve Trevor had become Ares, but no, that's not going on. And so it's just Ares is back, and he doesn't look anything like the Ares I loved in the Brian Azzarello, Cliff Chiang Wonder Woman.
No,
who had a whole interesting relationship with Wonder Woman.
Well, they're kind of playing on that, though.
Sort of?
Yeah, sort of. I don't know. I mean, it's also only, 2 issues in?
That's true. And the other thing is she's saddled with an artist that's just not right for her. I mean, I've seen that artist do good work other places, but it's just not clicking at all.
Really? I mean, I wouldn't say it's like the best team or the best artist by any means, but like I'm fine with all of it. It's been working for me. I don't know.
Well, that's cool. Well, it's always good when we don't agree. I just read Fantastic Four's issue 3 and 4 because they came in the mail at the same time.
Weird.
And
especially because 3 and 4 were like...
3 ends the first arc and 4 is kind of a standalone issue.
Yeah.
I thought the first 3 issues... Well, I thought issue 2 and 3 were terrible.
Okay.
And I thought issue 4 was okay.
Man, I've been loving Fantastic Four.
I know. I remember you saying that. So I was like, I had overly high expectations, but these are not... To me, these are not very interesting comics. Well, they're okay, but...
And to me, I don't have much perception of the Fantastic Four. But I know you were following it for years and years, and...
Yeah, but mostly when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Then since I was a kid, just on and off, I've liked certain creative runs on it.
Well, if Spider-Man plays too far out of the expectations of what were set up for me when I was a kid, I get a little odd about it.
Right. Spider-Man, I suppose, is closer to how he was when you were a kid than anything was close to how it is when I was a kid.
Right.
Since our childhoods are 20 years apart or more.
Right.
I'm basically your father's age, I believe. I was just a little surprised that I didn't like Fantastic Four a little more. Yeah. Because I do generally appreciate Dan Slott as a good writer. And
it seems very rare when we agree that a comic's generally worth the while.
Yeah, I don't know why we're friends at all.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
But why would we possibly want to start a podcast?
Well, it's funny. Most of the stuff we've read, I think we've kind of hit similar...
That's true.
...notes on here.
I guess there were some of those Fantastic Fours that maybe I liked more than you did.
Well, I mean, I enjoyed all of them. I think you have more, and we're getting more... Part of it, too, is like I liked them more after talking to you, because I was able to access some of it, whereas a lot of it just felt like frickin' weird.
Well, I think ultimately my two biggest complaints about the current Fantastic Four are The cosmic stuff is too big and wild and woolly. It's like there's no limits whatsoever on it.
Okay.
Which to me makes it less interesting.
Feels more like magic, less like science.
And then I feel like he goes overboard on, let's have a hug fest. Oh, we're just family. We love you, everybody, all that. And it just, yeah, I get it. That's how they all feel and everything. But it doesn't make for much of a story to read for me.
Yeah, because I guess the older Fantastic Four is more tension and more play.
Right, and it was always about how they squabbled like a family. And usually when you're hanging out with your family, you don't sit around saying, oh, we're like a family and it's so wonderful and we should hug each other. You only think of that after each other's died or something. But
okay.
I mean, I'm exaggerating for effect. Obviously.
No, I know, but
we do hug our family members and express affection for them.
I hope so. Yeah.
Well, and since we never stay dead, we will be back with another podcast.
And never a hug.
And never a hug. I never hug Matt, especially on the computer screen.
Alrighty.
I hear there are some fans who kiss the computer screen when it's on, but I've not seen that person. Well, really, we just have one person who demands we both take our shirts off all the time.
Our best fan.
And that's mostly about his family feelings about us.
All right. Well, until we pick another comic to talk about, never stay dead.